with you and your family. And I wanted to kind of go live here and talk a little bit about the queens of the early 18th dynasty. And you know that I typically like to go live around 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. If you get a chance, join me. I'm trying to do it as much as I can almost every day. So if you're looking, you happen to be on the web, you happen to be on YouTube, check me out. You'll be seeing regular lives from me on a regular basis, almost every day between around 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the U.S. So I hope that you are doing well. God bless you. We're going to talk a little bit about queens of the 18th dynasty. We're going to talk a little bit about them and just a whole kind of perspective on some of the early people and early women who gave birth really to the new kingdom. And we talk a lot about kings just because of, I think, our view, our Western view, and our kind of male, dominated way of looking at things, masculine way of looking at things. We don't really talk about the women, and that's not how our ancestors look at it, and it's not how it should be. And when you think about it, obviously you need both male and female to produce. You need both male and female to make any society grow, and to understand that takes a certain amount of spirituality and willingness to do for the other as you would have them do unto you. So we're going to talk about queens of the early 18th dynasty, and we're going to kind of jump into some things about it. And I'll ask for those who have asked, how you can continue to support. I ask you continue to support. There are a number of books I have on Amazon, stories about Black history, some interesting stories about Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Ada B. Wells and things of that nature. And then also we have, Religion of the Black Land. That's also available on Amazon. These are books, several books that I have that are available on Amazon. If you get a chance, take a look at them. You may be able to give it to somebody as a gift. Maybe you have a friend whose birthday is coming up or the holidays are coming up and you like to gift someone a book. I ask you and pray that you would look at my books and take a look at them. So I very much appreciate it, and I very much appreciate that support. And for those who are members, thank you so much. I'm going to be uploading the timeline that we talked about today to our membership tab here on YouTube. So I much appreciate it. So let's jump in. Let's talk about queens of the 18th dynasty. And just to let you know, the membership here on YouTube is $4.99 a month. And I upload various resources onto a site that members have access to, books, downloadable resources that they can read. I post things on the tab for members, as well as I develop courses, online courses. So I have 2 courses up right now, and I'll be putting up more courses in the very near future, strictly for our members. So kind of to develop a library. So there are already books up there and resources that you can download if you're a member. And I thank you. And I thank you for the $4.99 a month. It helps me continue to do this. So God bless you and thank you. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about queens of the 18th dynasty. And as we start to talk about this and talk about these remarkable women, when we think of the 18th dynasty, you really can't think of the 18th dynasty without thinking about the 17th dynasty. You start to think about, what gave birth to the new kingdom. And we like to kind of draw a line in the sand, if you will, and say, hey, it started with Ahmose, and Ahmose was the founder of the 18th dynasty. This is new kingdom. And we allow other people to kind of define for us what that means, because most people will say it's the 18th dynasty, obviously, when they control all of Upper Kemet and all of Lower Kemet. They kind of just say that's when it's a dynasty. That's when we consider it Kemet. And we overlook so many other people who gave birth to these things. And when you look at this lady right here, this woman right here, this is Ahmose-Nefertari. She's one of the queens, if you will, of the 18th dynasty. And she is part and parcel of what took place to bring the two lands together and to make sure that the hereditary line went on, and to do the necessary work of praying for and caring for the souls of the people, praying for and caring for the organization, the familial style, the politics, being able to do a lot with respect to helping a nation grow, helping a nation have legitimacy, helping the nation be valid, because obviously you can't be a nation all by yourself, right? You can't be a nation of nobody. You have to have people, and you're going to have male and female, and you're going to have talents and abilities amongst all your people. And if you begin to develop that and look at that, then you will find that, wow, you know what? I'm taking care of a lot. I'm actually moving forward my society when I look at everybody and what they have to offer. And from a spiritual standpoint, the Kemetic people and the Kushite people looked at queens and looked at men and women as having contributed to, obviously, the development of the universe, the development of everything. When you look at Amen, there is Mut and there's Khonsu. A lot of references to Amen and Mut and Khonsu and all throughout the 18th dynasty, all throughout the temple at Karnak and the whole complex that's there. A lot of references to that. If you look at Tahuti or any of the deities you think about, any of the expressions of God, they're male and female counterparts. This whole idea of yin and yang, which is a great concept, and we talk about balance a lot, that was present in ancient Kemet in many ways. You weren't just supposed to balance yourself from a truth standpoint in terms of balancing your heart against the feather, but the contributions of men and women were both looked at. And we sometimes just don't don't take a look at that ourselves. We sometimes don't appreciate that. So I want to lift these women up. I want to talk about these women and lift these women up and kind of lift them up in history, kind of remember their names, if you will. And we're going to talk about a couple of documents, because I like to talk about documents, so that you can read these things for yourself. And a lot of these things, many of these things I'll make available to people who are members on my channel. We'll make available a lot of these things to many of these things to them, so they can read and download and kind of go through these as well. But as I talk about, I want to kind of go through the sources and the primary sources for why we know what we know about ancient Kemet. So thank you so much. God bless you. I hope all is doing well. Thank you so much. So we go through some of these things. So there is as we look at the primary sources that tell us about a lot of stuff. I mean, really, that's what we're looking at when it comes to ancient Kemet. You look at sources, right? You're looking at documents, you're looking at monuments, you're looking at all kinds of things. And they tell us a lot about queens and women in the 18th dynasty. And you find that women in Africa in general, right? And in particular, when you see the 18th dynasty, and particularly when you see Kush, you see women in Africa, in particular this part of Africa at this time in the world, doing things that many women, unfortunately, were not allowed to do, forced not to do in many other societies for many, many years. And it's a ridiculous thing, because you hold yourself back when you hold back your talent, right? And so that makes no sense. So I want to talk about this particular Stela of this gentleman named Keres. And he is a person who lived during the 18th dynasty, at the very beginning of the 18th dynasty. And he's talking about his service. There are a number of documents where you have people who were basically servants of, or officials, assistants to either queens or high priestesses at the temple of Karnak. And we're going to go over some of those things as well in the future. You have a number of documents where men who were supporters of them, documented what they did and were proud of their service to the queen or to the high priestess, and talked about what they did. So this is what this particular document is talking about. This Keres is talking about his service to one of the queen mothers, who we're going to kind of jump into and look at it now. And he mentions the queen mother Amenhotep. And it's important to note that there are two Amenhoteps that you look at when you talk about the new kingdom. So as we take a look at this diagram here, and you look at Amenhotep, you at the very beginning of that diagram, there's one woman named Queen Tetisheri, who we'll talk about in just a minute. And she's kind of the grandmother. She's the grandmother of Ahmose. She's the grandmother of Ahmose, the founders, if you will, of the 18th dynasty and the end of the 17th dynasty. She's their grandmother, and Amenhotep is their mother. And so you begin to find Queen Amenhotep talked about a lot. But there's also an Amenhotep, you look at the very bottom left-hand side, there's an Amenhotep II, and she was married to Amenhotep II. So there are two Amenhoteps when you think about it. And you can take a look at, even when you look at Ahmose, who was the founder of the 18th dynasty, you see there right beside, right there on the right-hand side toward the bottom, Ahmose I, his wife was the famous Ahmose-Nefertari. She was the famous Ahmose-Nefertari who's posted right here. And this is their son, Amenhotep I, in front of her. So you find that they were looked at, and they were brought around, and they were deified. In this instance, there are people actually worshiping both of them here. They were deified in many ways. They worship both the queen mother and the king here, because of what they did in terms of the place of truth in the Valley of the Kings and the whole artisans workshops and things of that nature. But you find that queens were deified. They were looked at. They were brought along in ceremonies and mentioned as a part of official ceremonies, just like the king would be mentioned in many parts of the 18th dynasty. And I know there are a lot of people who have a lot of comments around it and thoughts around it, because I know there are a lot of people who can speak to this in their experience in reading about this. When we look at this Keres, when we look at what he says, so he's talking about Amenhotep. And, one of the things that's talked about here is, which Amenhotep is he talking about? And given the fact that Amenhotep I was actually a mother of the king, and Amenhotep II did not have a son who would become king, we believe he's talking about Amenhotep I. So you find that here's another kind of quick little diagram, if you will. You look at King Tao, Sincere Tao with Queen Tetisheri, kind of being the grandparents, if you will. And then you have King Tao II and Queen Amenhotep kind of being the parents. And then you have Ahmose and Ahmose, who are brothers. And this is the last king of the 17th dynasty. And this is the first king of the 18th dynasty. So you find them, in a situation where they honor their parents. They honor their grandparents, in particular their grandmother. So as we kind of look through this and kind of walk through, we're going to see what Keres does and what he says, as he's talking about really the queen who gave birth to the 18th dynasty. He's talking about Amenhotep I, and the woman who really, from whom the 18th dynasty really sprang. So he's talking about, and he talks about, in the year 10, in the first month of the third season, because that's how they looked at their seasons. They had several seasons, 3 seasons, and they had 4 months in each season. And so you had them, look at their season. And a lot of times they would talk about it with respect to the year of the king, the year the king was in reign. his rulership. And so you're talking about year 10, basically of Amenhotep the first. And this gentleman who's writing this, he's year 10 of Amenhotep the first, he was under the command of the king's mother. And when you think about it, he's talking about all the things that he did that was in service of Amenhotep the first. He was someone who was, keeper of the house of gold, keeper of the house of silver. He was somebody who she confided in, someone who took care of her business, someone who knew how to keep his mouth shut, someone who was the person who went before her or after her in ceremonies to make sure everything that had to do with her was taken care of. And he saw that service as being service that was close to God. He saw that service as basically serving the country, as well as serving the king and serving the queen, as well as being able to essentially, kind of make his way into heaven. So in this document, he's essentially showing and talking about what he did for the current king's mother. So this is Amenhotep the first mother. He's talking about, what did I do for his mother, the queen's mother? And so as he goes through it, he's the overseer of the house of Ceres. He was her chief assistant, if you will, of the queen's mother. He was the sole companion, the person she trusted in. And he talks about Amenhotep, who lives, and his name was Keres, or how would you like to pronounce Keres? And the king's mother was, under his commanded him that he did such a good job. He was actually given a statue in his honor, an Abju or Abydos. He was given a statue ordered by the queen. Now, you think about this, a lot of these queens in the early part of the 18th dynasty, in the early part of the New Kingdom, had exquisite tombs. Their sons and their grandsons made sure that they did. They had exquisite tombs, and they were able to give people statues, like she's gifting her assistant here, her steward here, and just like a king would. A king would obviously give gifts and give land and make commandments. The queens were also doing that, and you find documentations of it. So you find here him talking about how she gave a tomb, that she had a command from a statue be made at Bios, and confirming everything that he did for every favor, that there be made of you statues abiding in the temple among the followers probably of Asar or Amen, and that the virtues be put in writing. So she's essentially saying that this is the type of thing, this type of mortuary offering should be given to you. A statue should be given to you as my assistant. And this is the thing that the queen's wife does, because she was also a king's wife, for those whom she loves. And so he talks about here, he goes on to say that, he was her favorite, that he was able to go before her. So he talks about, how he was blessed and he was able to go before the people, and that he was a confidant of the queen, and that secrets were told to him, that the plan of his queen, he understood the plan of his queen, that he transmitted the affairs of the palace, that he found solutions, making things that were unagreeable and unpleasant matters, making them agreeable. So you find this man had to be a worker. He had to be a person who solved problems. He had to be a person who served his queen faithfully, served his queen in a way that he was, a problem solver and a way maker, if you will, in order to be able to solve the problems of the king's mother, this queen mother, if you will. And so he talks about that, and he seems to have been a talented man, because she recognized what he was able to do and what he brought to her and what he brought to the table, so to speak. And so, he says he was the person upon whom, the word of his queen depends, so upon whose word his queen depends. So he could say something to the queen and she could believe it. He was approaching truth. He knew the affairs of the mind. He was profitable in speech to his queen. So think about this. He's saying in his job that he did for Queen Amenhotep that he was somebody she could depend on. When she came to him as a confidant and asked for his advice, because he was one of her advisors as well, he had to give her good advice. So think about so many times we do this. And I think about young people today. I think about our children. I think about how a lot of us have to make sure whatever we do with wisdom. Whatever we do the best that we can. Some people think that the only goal in life is to get material things, or to find a skill that makes you money and not have to really develop these other aspects of yourself. You go to school and you study math and physics, and you study all kinds of science, and you study English, you study art, you study all kinds of things. And some people say, when will I ever do that stuff? When will I need that stuff? And sometimes you're thinking of that. You're actually, I think, kind of cheating yourself a bit, because you never know all of the resources, all the tools. Think of every subject that you study as making you better, as being exercise for your mind, as making your mind have basically better muscles, if you will, when it comes to mental acuity, that you can therefore approach problems with a greater set of tools. You can therefore apply wisdom to any situation. And here's what this man is hearkening to when I think about it: a man who did excellence and took pride in what he did. And in his role as the queen's advisor and the queen's confidant, he didn't know what he would be approached with at any given day. At any point in time, he could be approached with anything, and he had to be able to go and draw on his wisdom and his knowledge to approach a situation. And that's kind of what school does for you. That's what education is. If you hear children talk about it, if you get a chance to talk to a child and they ask themselves, why do I need to do this? Well, you may not go and be a mathematician at this particular college or this particular place, but you might need that discipline to understand how to manage finances if you want to, save for your retirement, or you want to be able to save for your kids' college, or you want to be able to manage your finances in your home. Or you might need that rationale on a job for a promotion you need, or as a manager on your job when you're analyzing, data and you need to know what to do. So you may not go and be a mathematician, but you might need the skills. You may be able to apply some of the things you're going to learn, or even the approach to it, learning how to approach things. So I say that, and I see that when I think of this person talking about approaching truth and being wise in what he does. And I think we should tell our children that education, the breadth of education that they get, gives them opportunities and develops in them strengths and mental acuity so that they can approach many different problems. And you don't know what type of problem, you don't know what your life is going to give you and what type of tools you will need to be able to address something. So I see this man saying that. He's saying, I knew the affairs of the mind, right? I was profitable in speech to my queen, great in respect in the house of the king's mother, weighing the affairs, excellent in speech, secretive in mind, administering the palace and sealing his mouth concerning that which he hears. So he wasn't talking, he knew how to keep a secret. And you can imagine if he was serving king's mother, he would come across many different things, and just the discipline that we need to have sometimes just to not say anything, just to kind of shut up. When you hear something that should not be repeated, I heard John Henry Clark say one time, and even people in my family say, some things don't need to be repeated. Some things need to stay packed away in history. You don't always need to say something that you hear. And this man seems to have understood that and knew that that was an important way to go about doing things. So he knew when to keep his mouth shut and respectful of that. And he was the one who solved difficult problems. He was a chief steward, and he was a vigilant administrator. And he was there for the king's mother. He was there for Amenhotep. So here's this man talking about how he took his job seriously, how he was able to apply, I think, discipline, which I think Aset is represented by Aset. And the whole story and tell, the ability to go about doing what you need to do until you get a job done. That's important for anything that you want to do. That's important for any development, any spiritual development. It's important that you want to do. This man was able to do that. And I think that we can learn a lot from it. And I kind of respect it. And I look, I see when this gentleman is talking about, being of service to the queen. And, and he talks about, many things that he did, and, and how he was, the city of gods will favor you, and how you as you bequeath and give things to your children, this is how you should be able to conduct yourself. Offerings should be given to you, those whose name they talked about Amen in this particular stone, Stela, and later on, Akhenaten will come around and chisel out the name of Amen. So he chisels out the names of Amen, but it was Amen that they were talking about originally in the Stela. And he's talking about the king of the lofty plumes, which is Amen, Lord of life given forever. And he talks about, he was somebody who was able to conduct his way in a particular way. He reconciled the utterance of the mouth. He was accurate like a pair of balances. I like that. He was saying the way he went about his job. And so you can kind of get an idea what Amenhotep was like, what the queen mother was like, what it would have been required to be able to be of service to her and to be able to service any of these queens that you're talking about. Because it isn't just the king, right? It's the queen that also has assistants and administrators and correspondents and things that she must do. What is it like to run a house, to run a queenship? And Amenhotep has basically given us a peek in that. He's given us a peek into what it was like to work for her, what it was like to be an assistant under her. And as we talk about God bless you, they don't. Some things don't need to be repeated, right? That I think is a lesson we have to learn, and it doesn't come with anything but discipline, right? It comes with discipline. You have to be able to do that through discipline. And a lot of us, and that's why on this channel, I talk a lot about spiritual development, because studying these things and studying the documents and getting to know these things for yourself and understanding who they are and what they did in history is great. But what they did, why they did it, and how they did it, I think is even more important. Why did they do that? Why did they respect men and women? Why did they put the queens and the kings in such a prominent position? Why did they do that? How did they do that? How did they develop civilizations and families that were remarkable? The 18th dynasty is a remarkable family that begins long before the 18th dynasty. And the people in Kush who developed, what they call the 25th, the Napatan dynasty. How did they develop families that were that that developed that remarkable time after time. Those are things we need to study. And so I think discipline is a part of that, in understanding not just what happened, but also how they did it is significant. So he talks about here being able to be reconciled, to be accurate like a pair of balances, to be like Tahuti in his name, inclining the heart to hear matters, listening to people. And that he was, very interesting here, he was a confidant of his queen, whom the queen of the two lands has advanced. So very interesting. He refers to here her as the queen of the two lands. So she's not just, it's not just the king of the two lands. She was the queen of the two lands. And you find, a lot of people, you can go around the world at this very same time, 1550 BC or thereabouts. And you can find a lot of people not saying it about women, not saying about their mothers, about their grandmothers, not respecting even the people that came. So imagine that, being someone who respects ancestors, honors ancestors, because that's a fundamental part of ancient Kemetic belief and thought, and their tombs, and remembering who came before you. Imagine someone who believes in respecting ancestors and you don't respect your own mother. A lot of people do that. You don't respect your own grandmother. They might respect their father, but not their mother. Like, amazing. That's incredible. Whole societies that are built in that way, where they're just basically not respecting those who helped to bring them forth. And that's not something that you find necessarily that they were doing necessarily in a Kemetic perspective. So that becomes important, and I think significant for us to talk about. So we're going to talk about another inscription, if you'd like to read it and look at it, because this becomes something that becomes significant, right? And as we start to look at this, and we see that here's a man who was a steward of Ahmotep, and we go right there to the top where it says Mother Ahmotep, and she was a mother of Ahmose and Ahmose the first, if you will. And you find them, talking a lot about, how her servant and how her steward, her assistant, kind of ran a tight ship, and how he was respected and disciplined, and she rewarded him with statues and things that were honorable in them. And thinking about the whole idea that if I'm going to respect my ancestors, I should respect those I come from. And imagine trying to build a society where you don't. Because if you don't respect them, they won't respect you. Even people coming after you won't respect you. So as we look at Ahmotep, that was kind of a picture in her. If you go right to the beginning and look at the grandmother, Tetisheri, Ahmose, you see right down there, Ahmose the first from 1550 to 1525. That's when he ruled, or thereabout, somewhere around there. He was the founder of the 18th dynasty. He's the person that everyone considers brought the two lands together. He's the founder of the 18th dynasty. And his famous wife is Ahmose-Nefertari. She is sitting right here in there with their son. This is Ahmose-Nefertari. Well, he does a remarkable thing where Ahmose the first recognizes his grandmother. He honors and recognizes his grandmother. And we're going to talk about that just right here in this particular building inscription. This was found in Abydos many, many years ago by Petrie, if you're familiar with him. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, because this document kind of gives us the name of Ahmose's grandmother, the mother of his mother and father, right? It gives us the name of his grandmother. And we think about, kind of what went forward and how he would, respect his grandmother, and what he would say is kind of a remarkable thing. So I kind of want to go through this, because so this would have been Queen Ahmotep's mother, just as we talked about. This would have been Queen Ahmotep's mother, and Ahmose the first is talking about his grandmother. So in this particular document, he is talking about a building for his grandmother, King Tetisheri. So we'll talk about it. He talks about right now. It came to pass that His Majesty, this is Ahmose the first, the founder of the 18th dynasty, that he sat in the audience hall, the king of Upper and Lower Kemet, right? So it's Ahmose the first giving life, while the hereditary princess, he says princess, the hereditary princess, great in favor, great in amiability, the king's daughter, the king's sister, divine consort, king's wife, Ahmose-Nefertari, right here, Ahmose-Nefertari, while she sits right beside him. While the king's officer sat right beside him, and she was there with his majesty, So you hear a gentleman here. Here's Ahmose, the founder of the 18th dynasty, the founder of the new kingdom. And obviously he wouldn't have looked at it that way. He would have just looked at himself as being a child of Ahmose and Ahmotep, and a child of his father, and the grandson, and the person who was magnifying and magnificent, and a representative of Ra. So he would have looked at himself that way. But we kind of look at it as, the 18th and 19th and new kingdom, 18th dynasty, and new kingdom. But here he is appearing in his audience hall before his subjects, if you will, in his court, with his wife right beside him. Now, a lot of these times when you see these things mentioned, a lot of times they may not even mention the wife. But in the 18th dynasty, you see them become more prominent around. And I'd like you to share some stuff down there. If you guys have comments, you can kind of share and put information about it. Internalize the information. Appreciate that is, Yeah, these are names. Yeah, that's the important to lock it down, Els. You're right, because if at the end of the day, if it's just information, if it's just stuff that you just know that are facts and it's not in your heart, if it hasn't taken deep root, like Jesus say, then you really can't move forward. If it hasn't taken root in your heart and isn't something that you've internalized, it's just facts that will float away when you need them. So here's Ahmose the First, who is with his wife in his audience hall making a proclamation as the king sitting on his throne. And this is amazing because a lot of people don't even mention, as I mentioned, the women when they talk about these things. They don't mention them. And so he says, one spoke with the other, seeking benefactions for the departed dead. As I mentioned, the whole idea of respecting the dead and respecting those who have moved on. Imagine having a civilization where you don't respect those who move on, then you expect people to respect you. That's like not respecting your grandparents, and then you get to be a grandparent and want people to respect you. That's kind of what it's like, right? And so that benefaction for the part of it, to the libations of water, to offer upon the altar, to be able to give enriching things for the good of every season at the monthly feast, and to be able to do, because there are a number of feasts of Tahuti, a number of feasts that would be there to honor people who are dead. And a lot of times, if you were a person whose family respected you, or you were somebody who was like significant, like a king or a queen or somebody, and you would get a mortuary temple. And a lot of people have some mortuary temple or some type of way they would remember you. And a lot of times it was very important for them to remember you on feast. So imagine us today if we have Thanksgiving coming up and there's somebody who's beloved in the family who's passed on. We remember them. Maybe you set a plate for them. They would set out food at the temple of the person, at their mortuary temple. But imagine it being like Thanksgiving, you set out food for somebody you remember. Or it's being Christmas or the holidays, Kwanzaa, whatever you may celebrate, there'll be Christmas and the holidays, and you set out something, you remember that person, you say something and remembers that person, you pour something to remember them, you set out a glass of wine or a glass of water for them. Those types of things we're talking about. He's talking about having ceremonies in a very real way to remember the dead and to pass on wonderful offerings to them that will help them come alive again in very specific ways that they believe. So there were a number of feasts throughout the year that they would want to do in honor of a person who had died and passed on, just like we would do it at special holidays. And his wife spoke of, why has this been remembered? Like, why are you doing this? What is the word that's been spoken? What is coming to your heart? So what are you saying? So apparently Ahmose-Nefertari, and this is one of the things where they're documenting a conversation back and forth between a king and a queen. And she's saying, basically, my husband, what have you done? What are you saying? What is the word that's in your heart? What is the thing that you wish to proclaim? Tell us. Sometimes they don't even have to show them speak. And he says, what's the purpose of it? He said, the king himself spake to her. It is I who have remembered the mother of my mother, the mother of my father, the great queen's wife, the king's mother, Tetisheri, the triumphant. He's not just calling her name. A lot of times when they talked about kings and queens, they would say triumphant. So he's making sure he's putting that respect on his grandmama's name. And he's saying, it's I who remember my grandmother. I remember my mother's mother. It's me who is going to honor her. This is what I'm going to say. And she was triumphant. That's very interesting when you think about how they started the 18th dynasty in the New Kingdom. And this man is respecting his grandmother in that way. And she has already had a tomb, and she has a mortuary chapel, in Waset and Abydos. But I have said to you that is my majesty has desired for her to have also a pyramid and a house, a monumental donation of my majesty. A lake shall be built. It shall have trees shall be planted. Its offerings shall be funded, equipped with people, endowed with lands, presented with herds, mortuary priests, ritual priests, having their duties, every man knowing his stipulation. He said, I'm building a place for my grandmother. I know she has a temple where people give her things, but I'm building a place for my grandmother. It's gonna have a house. It's gonna have people. It's gonna have priests, mortuary priests to do the rituals. I'm gonna have herd and cattle. I'm gonna have offerings. I'm gonna have people there to services. I'm gonna remember and respect my grandmother. This is almost the first. This is almost the first thing I respected. And whatever I bring through, everything that I pull forward, this is him talking about his grandmother. Tetisheri, almost the first to talk about his grandmother, Tetisheri, that he's going to remember her, that he's going to build her entire house and endow it with riches so that she would be remembered. This is a man who loves his grandmother. This is a man who probably thought a spiritual respect for her, a spirituality as relates to this. This is the man who was saying, he said, he's saying, because, at the end of the day, I want it to be known that I did for her more than anybody else has done for their mother. He said, because His Majesty did this because he so loved her greatly. He greatly loved her beyond everything, right? He loved his grandmother beyond everything. This is almost a verse. Listen to this man say it. You can think this, but this is the Mother's Day, right? That never did any of the former kings, any of the former rulers do it like this for their mothers. I have stand out. And he said a prayer for his grandmother and kind of went forth this. He's saying, nobody else has done this. I did this because I love my grandmother. And so when I stop and I think about that, you think this queen, this woman must have had an impact on her. He must have had respect for his grandmother. He must have said, this is a woman I'm going to hold up. This is a woman I'm going to remember. And I look about that and I put that right beside what we just read about in terms of the assistant of Hotep, the mother had the assistant of Hotep, and how he was very sincere and secretive when he needed to be, and disciplined when he needed to be, and took upon the whole idea of assisting this queen is very serious. You understand that the queen mothers of the early 18th dynasty and the early New Kingdom were nothing to play with. You understand that they must have been respected, and you can understand why they gave birth to a whole new kingdom into the 18th dynasty. So I just wanted to share that, and I thank you for joining me. I'm going to share more things, and if you have more things to share with them, please put it down below. I thank you very much. God bless you, and I'll talk to you soon.